I've been around this game long enough to know when the ground shifts under our feet, and 2025 just did that in a big way. With Trump's latest rollbacks, guns that were once tangled up in red tape are suddenly back in play, and it feels like the NFA just got punched square in the gut. Hello everyone, this is Ted from Line 45. Today, I'm laying out how these 2025 rule changes flipped the script on gun ownership and what that means for you and me. Before we dive in, do me a solid. Smash that subscribe, tap the bell, hit all the dang buttons down there. You don't gotta, but it keeps this train rolling and lets me crank out more of this wild gun talk for y'all. All right, enough of that. Let's get back to it. The big shakeup. I've been around long enough to know when gun laws actually changed the game, and 2025 did just that. A lot of folks saw the headline about Trump approving 8 guns and figured it was hype. Truth is, he didn't sign off on a list of specific models. What happened was bigger. His DOJ and Congress tore into the same rules that have been hanging over gun owners since the 1932. We're talking about the National Firearms Act of 1934, the law that created tax stamps, registrations, and those hoops you had to jump through if you wanted things like suppressors or short-barreled rifles. That grip started slipping back in July when Trump's DOJ dropped the defense of Biden's brace rule. Just like that, AR pistols with braces were legal again across the country. A month later came the big money change. Trump signed a bill that killed the $200 tax on suppressors and short-barreled rifles. You still register them, but that huge cost barrier, gone. On top of that, forced reset triggers, which ATF had been calling machine guns, got a green light after a DOJ settlement in May. ATF even had to return triggers they seized. And moving NFA firearms across state lines used to mean begging for permission. Now, you just file a notice. So when you hear banned guns are back, it's really about entire categories of firearms and gear that millions of us couldn't touch without red tape. And the first piece everyone noticed was the return of braced pistols. The comeback of our pistols and braces. If there's one change that gun owners noticed right away, it was the return of AR pistols with braces. I still remember the mess back in 2023 when the ATF pushed through their brace rule. Overnight, something like 10 to 40 million firearms were suddenly reclassified as short-barreled rifles. The ATF gave gun owners a so-called amnesty to register them without paying the $200 tax, but the whole thing was a nightmare. People were stuck wondering if they were felons just for keeping the same setup they'd been running for years. Lawsuits hit hard, and cases like Mock v. Garland started making real progress in the courts. Here's where things flipped. In July 2025, Trump's DOJ walked away from defending that brace rule. They pulled their appeal, which left the Fifth Circuit's decision standing, and that decision had already struck the rule down nationwide. Just like that, braced pistols weren't SBRs anymore. For a lot of folks, it felt like the weight of the ATF had been lifted off their shoulders. Now you can run your AR pistol with a brace without worrying about prison time or dealing with piles of paperwork. There's still some weirdness with people who went ahead and registered during the amnesty. The ATF hasn't really said if those guns will stay on the books as SBRs or be treated like pistols again. But for everyone else, the message is clear. Braced pistols are back, and they're legal again. And that win was just the start, because the next big target was the suppressor tax. The $200 suppressor tax dies. If you've ever bought a suppressor, you know the drill. You pick out the can you want, drop a bunch of money on it, and then Uncle Sam hits you with a $200 tax stamp. That fee has been around since 1934, and it's stuck like glue for almost a century. Back then, it was designed to make suppressors basically unattainable. Over the years, the price of guns and gear went up, but that stamp never went away. $200 on top of a $700 suppressor is enough to keep plenty of folks from even bothering. That's why this next move hit so hard. In July 2025, Trump signed a tax package that wiped out the NFA tax on suppressors. It doesn't kick in until the 1st of January 2026, but once the calendar flips, the $200 stamp is gone. You'll still have to register with the ATF and wait through the background check process. But the cost barrier that's been hanging over suppressors since the Great Depression is history. People on the gun rights side are calling it a win for safety, since suppressors cut down hearing damage and even reduce noise complaints at ranges. Anti-gun groups are warning that it'll make suppressors too easy to get. But from where I'm sitting, this is the biggest change to suppressor laws in nearly 100 years. And here's the thing, it wasn't just cans. The same law also killed the tax on short-barreled rifles, and that opened the door to a whole new fight. PDWs, PCCs, and exotic builds. Once the suppressor tax got wiped out, my attention went straight to another group of guns that's been stuck in limbo for years: pistol-caliber carbines and personal defense weapons. I'm talking about the classics like the MP5 clones, the CZ Scorpion Evo, B&T rigs, and even the Ruger PC carbine. These guns weren't banned, but the way the rules were written made it a headache to run them the way they were designed. Slap a brace on one, and the ATF said it was a short-barreled rifle. Go with a short barrel, and suddenly you're filing paperwork, paying the tax, and waiting months before you can even touch it. That's why the 2025 changes hit so hard. With the brace rule officially dead and the $200 tax stamp for SBRs going away in 2026, these guns finally make sense again. I can grab a Scorpion or MP5 style setup, throw on a brace or stock, and not feel like I've got a felony hanging over my head. And it's not just about cost. For years, the ATF has been all over the place with its rulings. One letter would say a build was good, and the next would contradict it. Now there's a new classification board that's supposed to make rulings consistent, so companies and shooters aren't left guessing. For me, that opens the door to a lot more creativity. Exotic PDWs, compact PCC builds, even belt-fed oddballs people only dreamed about are now back on the table, and the natural follow-up to that is short-barreled rifles. SBRs get cheaper. Now let's talk about short-barreled rifles, because this one hit me right in the wallet. For as long as I've been in the gun world, SBRs carried that automatic $200 tax stamp. Didn't matter if you were chopping down your own AR or buying one from a dealer, Uncle Sam made sure you paid up. On top of the sticker price and the wait time, that stamp kept a lot of folks from ever bothering. $200 might not sound crazy to some, but when you stack it on every single SBR, it flat out kills the fun for a lot of shooters. That changed in 2025 when Congress passed and Trump signed the tax reform bill that killed the NFA transfer tax. Starting the 1st of January 2026, that $200 stamp is gone for suppressors, SBRs, and a few other NFA items. You still have to go through the paperwork, fingerprints, background check, Form 1 or Form 4, the whole drill, so it's not like they're handing out unregistered rifles. But that extra cost that used to hang over your head is history. For me, that's huge. Building a compact rifle that handles like a dream inside tight spaces no longer means spending a couple of $100s just for permission. For gun shops and manufacturers, it opens up a market that was artificially locked down for decades. Critics are saying this makes NFA enforcement weaker, but from where I'm sitting, it just gives average shooters access without the financial punishment. And right after that change, the fight over forced reset triggers exploded back into the spotlight. Forced reset triggers legalized. Now here's the one that made my phone blow up with texts. Forced reset triggers, or FRTs, were one of the hottest fights in the gun world the last few years. The ATF came out and said they were basically machine guns because they let you shoot incredibly fast, and owners started getting visits and seizure letters. I remember guys posting videos of the ATF knocking on doors to scoop up triggers they bought legally. It was ugly, and it scared a lot of people into just shelving their rifles. That all flipped in May 2025. Trump's DOJ settled the lawsuits that had been dragging on, and as part of the deal, the ATF had to stop calling those triggers machine guns. Even better, they had to return seized triggers to folks who were part of the cases. That was a massive shift because it didn't just help the manufacturers like Rare Breed. It told regular owners they weren't going to be treated like criminals for a chunk of metal they bought online. Now, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. The settlement only covers certain FRT models and only at the federal level. If you live in a state like California or New York, those triggers are still banned under state law. And while the feds pulled back, anti-gun groups are already talking about new lawsuits to try to shut them down again. But right now, for most of us, FRTs are back on the table. And that takes us right into the bigger NFA reforms. NFA reforms and what's next. When you step back and look at everything that went down in 2025, it's not just about braces or suppressors or even triggers. The whole system that's been wrapped around gun owners since the 1,930 seconds finally got shaken up. For years, if you wanted to take an NFA firearm like an SBR or a suppressor across state lines, you had to file that 5,320.2 form and then sit around waiting for the ATF to say yes. Trips got canceled, training got delayed, and half the time the approval showed up weeks after you needed it. Starting in 2026, that headache is gone. Instead of waiting for permission, you just file a notice. You're still telling the ATF, but you don't have to wait for them to bless your trip before you throw your rifle case in the truck. The other big change is the ATF finally setting up a classification board. If you've been in this game a while, you know how ridiculous it's been. 1 year, a firearm is a pistol. The next year, it's an SBR, and manufacturers never knew where they stood. I've seen companies spend years developing a gun only to get kneecapped by a sudden letter. Now those rulings go through a panel that's supposed to be consistent. Time will tell if it works, but at least it's not one guy's decision swinging the market. Put it all together, and you've got the biggest rollback of federal gun restrictions since 1934. And trust me, the fight over what comes next is already heating up.